First we need Spring Tool Suite for Windows. We'll go to Google and search for Spring Tool Suite. We'll click on this link. We'll download Windows version. So after it's downloaded, we'll click show in folder. We'll cut this and we'll paste it on our desktop. Now we'll double click on it and we'll also double click on this. So it'll open. We'll select this folder STS and click extract to, and we'll select desktop as our location. Now finally we'll click OK. It will extract Spring Tool Suite for us. So after it's extracted, we'll close this, we'll refresh. We don't need this anymore, we'll just delete it, and we'll double click on this and open our Spring Tool Suite. We'll click launch. Spring Tool Suite is loaded, but now we need a project to open in this IDE, right? Go back to Google and search for Spring Initializer. Click on this link and we'll select Maven as our project because we are creating an API, and here we'll name our project validation track. We can give some description. So we have given a description, we'll leave other details as it is. Then we'll click on add dependencies, right? So here we need Spring Web. We'll click control and click on Spring Web. We need this JDBC API. We need Spring Data JDBC. We need H2 database. We need MySQL driver. We need Spring Boot Dev Tools also. We'll click on this. So right now we have 6 dependencies, right? So finally we'll click on generate. So it will download us this zip file. We'll click on show in folder. We'll cut from here and paste it on our desktop. We'll right click on this and click on extract all. We'll click extract, so it will get extracted. So right now we don't need this, so we'll delete this. Now we'll come back to our Spring Boot IDE. We'll click on import projects, right? So our project is Maven project. We'll click on existing Maven project. We'll click next. We'll click on browse. We'll select our desktop and select our project, right? We'll select the folder and click on finish. So our project should be loaded. Our dependencies would be installed, right? So first we'll open our project. We'll open this file. So this is our starting point of our application. We'll right click here and click on run as Spring Boot application. So our application should be running. We can see that H2 database, our dependency, is being used. Our Spring Boot application is running on this 8080 port. So our Spring Boot application is running successfully. So we'll close this. Here we'll create a new package called controller. We'll put dot controller and hit enter. We'll again right click on it and create a new class called controller. Hit enter. Whenever we hit a request to our API, controller would run. So we'll give this an annotation as a rest control. I'll just click control plus space, hit enter. So it will be imported. We'll give another annotation called request mapping. Request mapping, I'll just control plus space, hit enter. So this receives an argument path. It's like the path for our API, right? So the initial path, root path of our API. So it would be VT, validation track, VT, right? So here we have our controller. We can have as many methods as we want. So we'll have a method which returns a string test return our API is working. right? So we have a simple method which returns this string, so we need to add another annotation for this method, right? So that annotation would be get mapping. So this also receives an argument which will be the path for this method, like the URL path. So we'll just name it as test and I'll just save. So it should rerun our application. So we can now just go to localhost 8080 and hit this method. I'll just go to Google and I'll just type localhost 8080 slash vt slash test. If I hit enter, it should return our API is working. So it's the basic part, right? But what if we need to fetch some data from a database, right? So we'll just do some basic fetching from a database. To fetch data from database, we need a database. Let's say we have a database and it has a table which has some columns. For that we need a model file with all the columns which that table has. We'll create a new package. We'll name it as model and hit enter, and inside this package we'll create a new class called db columns. We can name anything we want. This model file will have properties of the column name, and this will also have getters and setters. We'll click on finish. So we have our class. So this will be like a Pojo class. So our first column name would be like private string main underscore id. I'll just copy this and paste it 2 or 3 times, right? So our second column would be Insta. Our third column would be LinkedIn. Our fourth column would be Twitter. And fifth column would be YouTube. We can hit save. We need to right click inside this class. So we should click on we'll click on generate getters and setters. We'll select all and click on generate. So it will generate getters and setters for our properties, right? We'll hit save. We'll close this model file and we'll create another method like this. We'll just copy this method and paste it here. We'll rename this like all data. We'll also rename this method all data. So instead of returning a string, we'll return a list which will hold db column type elements. First need to import the list from java.util. Then we need to import db columns model file. After we import it, we also need to return the list, right? So for now we'll return null. So right now we don't even have any db or any columns or any table, right? So first we'll create that database with the table which has these columns, right? So if you don't have Workbench, you can install it. I have a video on it, right? So I'll just open it. MySQL Workbench. We just need to create a new connection, give connection a name, right? Validation track. So our port will be 3306. Our host name is localhost. Username is root. Password is whatever you set up the password while installing Workbench. My password is root. By default, the password is root or empty. Click on OK. Open this and type your password and click enter. So I'll just maximize it. So here I'll right click on it and click on create schema, which is a new database, right? Validation track DB would be a good name. So I'll name my database and click on apply. Click on apply again. Click on finish. So our new database is created, a new schema is created. And now we need to create the table. Right click and click on create table. So here we need all the columns that we have in our model file. So so main id, insta, LinkedIn, Twitter and YouTube, right? So I'll just create all the columns. Please notice that this LinkedIn name should be same as this name, Twitter and YouTube. So I'll rename this as Insta. I'll click on apply, finish. So if I click on this table, oh, I didn't even give this table a name, right? So now I'll rename the table. I'll click on the settings icon and I'll rename the table as VT table. Click on apply, finish. So this is our VT table. If I click on this icon, we have no data at all. I'll just enter some dummy data. So I have just entered some dummy data. Now I'll click on apply again, click on finish. So we have some dummy data in our database, right? To fetch this data, we need JDBC template, right? So we'll minimize this, we'll open our IDE, we'll close this model file. Here we need our JDBC template, right? So for that, I'll just import JDBC template. I'll click control space, click on enter. I'll click JDBC template semicolon. I'll give this an annotation of auto-wired. So auto-wired creates an object. So if this is the class, then this would be the object of this class. We need to use the methods inside this object. To get the data from the table in our database, we need a row mapper. We'll have a row mapper. I'll explain what row mapper is. We'll import the row mapper. I'll just give row rm equals to, so this has a type, right? So the type would be our model file. So db columns. So this would be equal to new bean property row mapper. We'll import this as well. So here I'll put the semicolon. We need to pass this model class here as well as here, put as class, right? It's showing an error because I have misspelled the model file name. Put this again from JDBC core, hit save, right? What this row mapper does is it maps all these properties to our table in our database, right? Whatever names this properties have here, right, would be matched in our table with the database, right? We needed a row mapper, we have a row mapper. We need an SQL query, so we'll have an SQL query. We'll create a variable which is type of string called SQL. We'll name this as SQL. So this would be our query, right? So select star from, we'll have the table name vt underscore table. Select star from vt underscore table. I'll hit save. So we have a row mapper, we have our SQL query, and we need a list where we are going to store the data, right? So we'll have a list. Oh, I have been doing this in the wrong method. I'll just cut this from here and paste it here, right? So we need to create a list, right? So list of type db columns. Oh, I'll name this all data, right? So this would be null for now. I'll copy this and return this here. I'll just use the JDBC template. So JDBC template dot query. So the first argument would be the SQL query, SQL, and the second argument would be our row mapper, and that's all. Just by doing this, JDBC will map all the columns inside our model file with the table, and it will also run this query and get the data and store it inside this list. So all we need to do is just return this list. Our API is vt slash all data. If we hit vt slash all data, nothing should be visible. Error should be shown. All data error should be shown. Why? Because we have not configured our connection with the database, right? vt table not found, this database is empty. So inside our application properties, we need to connect to our database. Our database has the password. If I close this and if I open this again, it asks me for a password, right? We are providing the password, only then it is showing the data inside our tables, right? So we need password and user and the URL for the database. So the URL is this, so MySQL at localhost 3306. So we need all these three things in our API so that it could connect to our database, right? So we'll just provide that inside our application properties. So inside our application properties, we'll have some variables which connects our API to the database. So the URL is the URL of our database. So JDBC colon MySQL. So it's MySQL database. This is localhost, and this is the port on which our database is running. So our database is also like a server, like our API is also a server. So we have the port number for our database, and here we should give the database name, which is validation track db, right? So validation underscore track underscore db. Username is root, password is root, and this is the driver class for our MySQL. We'll close this, we'll rerun our application, and now we'll go back to our endpoint and hit again. We get the data from our database. So whatever data is here, we see it here as well, right? So this is the basic fetch API. Basic fetch, I have just written the basic fetch API. So in the next video I'll be doing login API. Thanks for watching.